From the rolling green hills to lively city streets, the spirit of Ireland echoes around the world. And nowhere is that spirit more alive than in the walls of an Irish pub. A place for stories, laughter, and connection. I'm Tim Grant, and this is the Pubs and Pints Podcast, where we speak with people from Ireland and those around the world deeply connected to their Irish roots. Through their experiences, we uncover cherished Irish pubs, local haunts, and the characters that make them special. Today we have John Stiastny, a retired NYPD detective, here to tell us about growing up in an Irish and German household in Woodside, Queens, New York.
Well, first let's have a little sip.
To the podcast.
To the podcast. Oh, that's nice. That's very nice.
That's nice.
I like that.
Oh, a couple of years ago, 3-4 years ago, I started drinking bourbon. Yeah. I acquired a taste for bourbon.
Yeah.
And it kind of stuck. And I like it if I'm sitting outside alone with a cigar.
Do you feel like the bourbon is any like seasonal at all? Like some people like to drink it in the colder weather.
No. I got a friend of mine. He drinks blackberry brandy in the winter. And I can't understand that. And you know,
last time I drank blackberry brandy was like skiing when I was 18 years old.
Yeah, well, that's all you had, right? But what some people do is like, I remember my mother used to take blackberry brandy, and heat it up. Just put a little, not too much. You don't want to burn the alcohol off, but just heat it up, and it would really warm you up. You know? Yeah. Irish mother. You know? My name is John Stiastny. I grew up in Woodside, Queens. Went to St. Sebastian's. Come from German-Irish heritage. My grandparents on my father's side came over from Germany. And on my mother's side, they came over from Ireland, which is funny about both of them. My grandparents came over from Germany, and they met here on my father's side. Yeah. On my mother's side, they came over from Ireland. My grandfather's from the north, and my grandmother's from the south, and they met here. So it's like they didn't come to the States together. They met here in the States. Back then, it's like when everybody came in, they went to the Irish neighborhood or the German neighborhood, Yorkville, and that's where they met, and that's how I am. I'm second generation, and I grew up in Woodside, Queens, and Woodside, Queens was predominantly Irish. Yeah. I mean, you had a couple of Italians, a couple of Germans, you know, but most of the people there were just Irish people. Now, I'm half German, half Irish, and I actually had a girl that I went to grade school with, and she was Italian. And I ran into her years later, and she told me, she didn't like growing up in Woodside. And I was like, why? And she goes, well, because I wasn't Irish. I said, my name is Stiastny. I'm not Irish. She goes, no, but you looked Irish, so you got away with everything. And I guess, and I did everything. When we were growing up, there was certain, like the rite of passage. You had to be in the Boys Brigade. We didn't have Boy Scouts. We had the Boys Brigade. Ed Farrelly ran their Boys Brigade. He owned Shelley's Bar. And you had to go through the Boys Brigade. And at the time, you know, it was like almost like a little paramilitary organization. You had to wear a uniform. They taught you how to march and salute and left foot, right face, left face, about face. And you did that. And they did teach you other things, like when you did, you know, it was like sort of like the Boy Scouts, but different. And it was more structured, as I thought, but. That
was in Woodside?
Yeah, in Woodside, St. Sebastian's. That's where I went to school. Right. They were very big into sports. They had a great basketball team, and they had a swim team. So it's you play basketball or you went swimming. I never really made the team. I did make the B team in grade school, playing basketball in the B team, and I was on the team for a year. And I think at the whole time, I scored 2 points. You know? So,
well, at least you scored.
Yeah, at least I scored. And so that was it growing up. When my grandparents came here, I didn't realize it until later on. My grandmother, my mother's mother, when she came here, she stopped being Irish and she was American. She never wanted to go back.
Which was the case a lot of times.
Yeah, because she knew poverty over there. Yeah. Even though when she came here, my grandfather worked in the daytime. He was a tailor, and my grandmother worked at night. She cleaned offices. She couldn't go to work until my grandfather came home because she needed his shoes. So they were poor here too, you know. And but my grandfather, he was still Irish, and he was from the north. So we grew up in Woodside. They lived like 2 blocks from where I lived. And my grandfather went to countless Irish bars. and would go to different bars, and he would talk to all the Irish. And all the Irish bartenders back then, it was different than a bartender now. They all came to work. They had a white shirt, and they all wore a tie. All the bartenders back then wore a tie.
Yeah.
I remember I'm like 8 years old, and I'm walking into bars, finding my grandfather in the bar. I'm jumping up on the bar, and they give me a glass of Coke, and and I'm just sitting there, and didn't know what to
Did it
say.
have the cherry on top?
No, they didn't give me the cherry. And but they'd give me the glass of Coke, and I'd sit there with my grandfather. And then I'd walk with him to other stores, and I'd carry his newspapers for him. And we'd go to another bar, and he would be in there talking. And like my grandfather gets from like the German-Austrian border. And when they came here, they met in Yorktown.
In Yorkville.
Yorkville, right?
Yeah.
New York and Manhattan.
Because that's the same. That's just actually the same story as my grandparents, my great grandparents.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you're third generation?
No, I'm second generation on my father's side, and I'm third generation on my mother's side.
Okay.
But this is actually a really interesting story. John Delmore was my great-great-grandfather. John Delmore came to America when he was 16 years old, lied about his age, and fought in the Civil War.
Oh, wow.
And they lived in the Yorkville section. He was captured. I have all these records. He was captured in the Civil War, released at the end of the war, and then he went on to have a family. Then he had my great-grandmother, who I knew. She died when I was 13.
Oh, wow.
So which actually is kind of interesting because, like, I actually could have said to her, your dad fought in the Civil War? If I had the smarts to even ask her a question like that. But that's interesting, right? But her dad died when she was young. They lived in Yorkville, and he was murdered. Oh. And I have the newspaper articles, the hunt for Bull Powers. They knew who the guy was that killed him, shot him outside of a bar in Yorkville.
In Yorkville, okay.
Yeah. Now I don't know if you like Yorkville. York Avenue,
right?
That used to be Avenue A. That wasn't York Avenue back in the 1800s.
Yeah, I got to ask. My mother was born here, but she had her older brother was 6 years older than her, and they had to send him back to Ireland when he was born because they needed somebody to take care of him while they were working, and then they sent him back to Ireland. But then World War II broke out, and so he couldn't come back. He didn't come back to the States until he was 17, and when he came back, until the day he died, Uncle Joe had a broke. He was Irish. He would tell you different stories about things that were going on.
This is your Uncle Joe.
My Uncle Joe, and he was. I loved him. I loved Uncle Joe.
Tell me a little bit about Uncle Joe.
Uncle Joe was a character. He was a typical Irish bachelor. Was never married. He had a couple of girlfriends. He worked for Pan Am.
Was he living in Woodside? Or?
Yeah, he was living with my grandparents. My Uncle Joe lived there, and then my grandmother's brother, Uncle John, also lived there. And Uncle John was another one. He was a typical Irish bachelor. He was just never got married. And then my Aunt Betty was born like 6 years after that. But there was at least a 12-year difference to him. But even though it was a 12-year difference, she didn't know him until he came back when he was 17.
Okay. So your mom was born in Woodside?
No, in Manhattan.
Oh, she was born in Manhattan.
Yeah, when her and my father got married, that's when they moved to Woodside.
Oh, okay. All right. What year was that about?
They got married in 59. And my brother was born in 60. So I guess it was 59 because my brother was born in Woodside.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So they moved to Woodside. Now, was it like you're moving out to the suburbs, or?
I don't really know that much about it. I really don't know. But we lived in the house. We lived up. It was a 2-family house. My German grandparents lived downstairs, and we lived upstairs. There was 3 of us living in a 2-bedroom apartment. It was me, my brother, and my sister. My mother had 3 kids in 3 years. And we had 1 bathroom. The shower didn't work. I had to take a bath in it all the time. Right. I mean, it was just, it was different growing up back then. It was different than growing up nowadays. Yeah. But Woodside was a working class neighborhood. It was all blue collar workers, whether you were a tradesman or there was cops, there was firemen, and it was mostly Irish. And there was a bunch of Irish bars in Woodside. A ton of them. Like every 3rd store was a bar. And then Donovan's opened up in 1966. Yeah. I remember I think I was in the 1st grade. I think it was like 1968 or something. I think I was 6 years old, and it went on fire. And I was in St. Sebastian's, and I was right across the street. And then they rebuilt it. And I remember when they rebuilt it, my father said, they didn't change a damn thing, And but Donovan's was as I can remember, we had a lot of bars, but Donovan was the first place that opened up where you could eat in the bar. And I remember being a kid going up, and you would go into, nobody ate out like they do nowadays. It was like on special occasions. But whatever the occasion was, it could have been birthday on a Tuesday. We're going to go out to dinner for your birthday. And you'd have to wait at Donovan's to get in on a Tuesday. You know, it was weird, you know?
Yeah.
And
that's a good thing.
I can go into Donovan's today, and I could probably be in there, and within an hour, I'm going to know somebody coming through the door.
Yeah.
You know, because
that's a great feeling.
Yeah. And Donovan's, as soon as you walk in, you know, you felt like you were at home.
Yeah.
And I remember there's so many different stories about Donovan's. I remember it was right across the street. On one side, you had the school right across Roosevelt Avenue and Woodside Avenue. And on the other side of 58th Street, you had St. Sebastian's Church. St. Sebastian's Church was everybody, when we grew up, whether you were Irish or Italian or German, everybody was Catholic.
Right.
Everybody went to church.
Yeah.
And St. Sebastian's Church, at one time, I didn't know, it was way before my time, it used to be a movie theater. So if you ever went into it, it like slopes down.
Yeah. Well, I got married there, so.
Yeah, you know how big it is, right?
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful church.
Yeah.
But I remember going, we used to go, we did it a couple times. We'd go to midnight mass on Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, because we always thought we'd killing two birds with one stone. For Holy Day, it's an obligation. You had to go on Christmas Eve, and then you had to go on Christmas Day. That's just the way it was back then.
Yeah.
I remember we used to go to midnight mass, but I remember we used to go into Donovan's. And this is, all right, so this back in the day when you were able to drink at 16 at 18 at the bar, but at 15 you were in the bar. You know, nobody.
Right.
It wasn't. It was
a
totally
leniency.
different. Yeah. And then you used to go to church on midnight mass, and you'd be in the back of the church, and all you smelled was alcohol. All the guys, all the old men were in the back of the church. It was funny. And it was a good time. And Donovan's was a staple. And as we grew older, you would go into Donovan's, and I know that there's many more people that know much more about Donovan's than I do. You know, I just know I used to go and hang out in there. You used to go in there on a Friday and Saturday night, and you'd be 5-6 deep at the bar.
Yeah.
You know, and it was a totally crowded place.
Total neighborhood bar.
Oh, yeah. You went in there, you knew everybody.
Yeah.
You know, if you didn't know everybody, and because everybody, Irish and we're related, it's like, if I don't know you, I know your cousin.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And so that's the way it is. And even now you can go in there the same way. I was in there not long ago, probably within the last year, and I seen a guy that I went to grade school with, and I haven't seen him since grade school. I was on Facebook at one time, and he was on Facebook, and he became the whole neighborhood thing. And I remember, and I looked at him, and I said, "Wally," and he looked at me. He picked me right out too.
Wow.
And I haven't seen. I'm telling you, it was grade school, and I graduated grade school in 1976. You know,
Yeah.
So I haven't seen him in years. And
so when you walk into Donovan's,
when you walk into Donovan's, you get a feeling of your home. Even now, I mean, Donovan's was probably sold. The original owner, Joe Donovan, was a fireman, and I don't think I ever met him, but I met his brother, Jack Donovan.
right? Well, Jack managed it, and Joe ran the bar in Bayside. Well, I think that was kind of how it went. That's what I was.
Well, I knew Jack because I was a police officer,
right?
And he was a detective. My father was also a cop, and I came from a typical cop. My mother was a nurse.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about you. You were NYPD,
right?
What year did you get on NYPD?
I got on in January 1985.
85, and then you went on to be a detective.
I had a very good career, and I went to auto crime, and I made a detective, and I stayed there until I retired. And,
did you know Jack? Did you know Jack Donovan as a police officer?
No, okay. I knew him because my father was also a police officer. He was a squad boss, and Jack worked for my father. Oh, and then we would go into Donovan's, and then he would see my father in there, and and there was also another guy in there. It's Mike. He had a real short name. I don't know, like Fox or something. Shouldn't be using people's names, but the guy Mike, he ended up becoming a big shot lawyer or something for like Verizon or something. But he was the maitre d', and I would go in there and he would see us, and if we were coming in and getting something to eat or something, and you got a table right away. Yeah. So again, it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, we would we grew up in a typical working class family. My mother worked. Actually, she worked part time as a nurse, and she was the neighborhood nurse too. Any of the kids in the neighborhood, Zara will tell you, any of the kids in the neighborhood that got hurt, they skimmed it and went to see my mother.
Yeah.
You know?
That's great.
Yeah. You know, it was a good.
It's a very tight neighborhood.
Yeah, it was, because when you were out playing in the street, you know, as a kid, and it was totally different. At 6 years old, I was going to St. Sebastian's. I lived on 63rd Street. It was on 58th Street. 6 years old in first grade, I was walking to school by myself.
Right.
You let a kid out 6 years old to go to school now, they're going to arrest you.
Right.
You know, it was just totally different. But when you were out and you were out playing with all the kids or something, and one of the other parents, if your parents weren't there, they told you that was your parent. They were like, you know, they were your substitute parent.
Exactly.
You know, I can't tell you how many times your wife's father told me to get in the house. You know, so it was a good neighborhood. It was a good place. It was a great place to grow up.
It was one of those neighborhoods where if somebody did something wrong, by the time you got home, your parents already knew about it because, and there wasn't even a phone back then.
No. I guess they had hummingbirds or something. I don't know, but it was a great place to grow up. I have friends there that I grew up with that we're still friends today, and you know.
Okay, so when you walk into Donovan's and you see somebody you know, how does that make you feel? Like at this point in the game, like you
feel great. You feel great that you actually going in there, you know. And I got married in the mid-'80s, and I moved out of Woodside. Even though my father still owns a house in Woodside. My father's going to be 90 years old. He doesn't live there. He lives in Florida. But we still own a house there. So for years, even now, I go back for one thing. I got to go check on the house or something. Or I'll meet somebody that my friend Brian, if he comes in, you know, his mother still lives around the corner. If he comes in, he calls me up. He's coming in. Oh, yeah, we'll go out for lunch. Or we'll go out for dinner. And where we going? We're going to Donovan's.
Yeah.
It was
like Bryant?
Yeah, Brian.
Yeah. And there's a great story right there. Brian's Chinese.
Right. So, which was back then, it was very hard for Brian to grow up in a particularly Irish neighborhood. But Brian was one of us. You know, he was Chinese, and it's like, you know, but he was.
Well, I remember the first time I met Brian, you know what I saw? Kindness.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Is that right?
Oh, definitely.
The man is like, he just has a genuine kindness about him.
He does.
And my wife always spoke very highly of him. So
Brown was a good guy.
Yeah.
He is a good guy. He's
obviously, he's a friend of yours. So.
Yeah. And your brother-in-law, I know him since we're 1 month apart.
Oh, you and Joe.
Me and Joe, 1 month apart. I know Joe my whole life. And
you were both cops?
We were both cops. We used to go. We went on vacations together. We hung out. We did a lot together growing up.
Yeah,
and
these good people.
Yeah. So it's, you know, my neighborhood friends. They're still my friends to this day.
Yeah.
And then there's another guy we're going to throw in there. I'm going to throw his name out there on the podcast, Damien. And Damien, it's like I always tell everybody, I got a guy for everything. I got a guy for this. I got a guy. If I don't have a guy, I got to go to Damien. You know. So actually, Damien's cousin. One of I don't know if it's the Connor or the Jacobson, I don't remember which one, that owns Donovan's now is Damien's cousin.
So we'll have to ask.
Yeah, Damien was he knew so many more people than I did because I came from a very small family. Like I always tell everybody, my family, we couldn't even get a good card game going. But Damien came from a very large family.
Damien knows everybody.
Everybody. And he can get anything done. Anything you want done, he can get it done.
Yeah.
And
I remember going to a party at Damien. He had that house out in the Hamptons.
He still does, yeah.
Well, I remember going out there, and there's a guy there that at the party that I used to work with.
Oh, in the fire department.
Yeah.
Going back to the whole Donovan story, it's like, you know, that's his family. And when we were growing up, no matter what you did, you know, whatever the occasion, whether it was a communion, a baptism, or a baby shower, a wedding shower, there was never any second thoughts where it was going to be. It was always at Donovan's.
Yeah.
I don't care what the thing. Donovan's was funny. It had different sections, and they looked a little different. They had one that had like old wood on the walls, like paneling, and then they had the other one more rustic, and it had a fireplace in it. And then they had and no matter what you had going on, you would always go to Donovan's, and that's where we were having all our events. You know,
reunions.
Everything happens at Donovan's. Yeah. And you know,
it's funny. I interviewed Jimmy Jakes and
Dan Connor.
Dan Connor, and Danny's. I think it was Danny was going on about you know, they have people are here, you know, because the church is right there.
Yeah.
People are here for their parties for their communions. or it could be a rehearsal dinner, and he goes on and on and on. And actually, I was talking about this with my wife, and she said, well, did you tell him that we had our rehearsal dinner there? And I said, oh, I forgot. So, yeah, I had my rehearsal dinner there as well, and I actually forgot to even bring that up.
Yeah, it's everything that happened in any big event in my family. I remember when I graduated from the police academy, we had luncheon at the Donovan. When I got promoted to detective, I had a luncheon at Donovan's.
Eddie Bowles.
Yeah,
Me and Eddie Bowles got promoted to captain together. And that's where we had our party after the promotion.
That's just the way it was. When you walk into Donovan's at any time, you just feel like you're at home. If you're from Woodside, you can walk in Donovan's anytime, and it's like things haven't changed in here. It's still,
Yeah.
The only thing that's changed in Donovan's now is that they take credit cards, which they didn't before.
Now, is there anything, when you go in the bar, is there anything, any memorabilia, any pictures, anything that you would suggest somebody who's never been to Donovan's to go see?
Well, they'll have a lot of stuff of the Woodside heroes in there, people that have grown up in the neighborhood. If you look up, the most of the Medal of Honor recipients are of Irish heritage. You look at their names.
That's interesting. I actually saw a piece one time. Jack Donovan was talking about a guy who got the Medal of Honor
from Woodside.
Yeah, I believe it was President Johnson that gave it to him, or it might have been Nixon.
So it was a Vietnam vet.
Yeah, it would have been Vietnam. Oh, and actually in that same piece, Jack mentioned how the zip code for Woodside lost more men in the Vietnam War than any other zip code in the country.
Probably.
That's an interesting.
I've heard things along those lines before. I've heard when you were growing up, everything was divided. It's almost like you ever go to Louisiana, down in New Orleans? Everything's in parish down there. Everything's in a parish.
Yes, yeah.
So when you're growing up in Queens, everything's a parish. What parish are you from?
Yeah.
That's how you relate to everything, And so, from Woodside, from St. Sebastian's, or from St. Mary's of Winfield, which is around the corner, or Corpus Christi, which was on the northern side. It was a good time. It was a good place to grow up. And something now I live here on Long Island. Me and my wife, we raised, the 4 kids out here for the most part. And I sometimes think it would have been pretty cool to grow up out here because I see all the things that they've done. I can see how just so much to grow up. But I don't think I would have traded growing up in Woodside for anything. I mean, you learned so much. I don't want to put anybody down, but we had a lot of street smarts back then. You had to.
I think it's a good thing to say that because that is an absolute fact across the board, anywhere.
Yeah. So, and being young, we used to, the things that we did as kids that your parents never knew. 8, 9 years old, we were taking the train going to Shea Stadium trying to sneak into a Met game. It's like my parents never knew that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, it was just different thing. And I'm sure the kids out here, they did other wild things that we would never have done.
Is there anything about the pub that you want to share with the world?
Yeah. Now, growing up in Woodside, we had a lot of Irish bars. And Donovan's was the one that started with the food. A lot of the other Irish bars, they were just serving. But what makes Donovan's ahead of them with a lot of things was when you go in there, you felt like you were at home at all times. You always, we go into the other Irish bars, they had their points, and we had Finnegan's on Roosevelt Avenue. Across the street from Finnegan's, you had Dillon's. Above Finnegan's, you had Tower View Ballroom, and you had Shelley's across the street from Donovan's, and the Starting Gate. There was just so many bars. But Donovan's is the one, probably because they started with the food, and everything that your family did, any occasion, was always celebrated at Donovan's. So you always found a reason to go back to Donovan's.
Yeah.
Donovan's it holds a special place. And everybody that comes from Woodside, because everybody's been there. Everybody knows somebody that's been there. And the place has been around since 1966. It's almost 60 years it's in the neighborhood. And it's done right by the neighborhood. You would go in there. It's just like, hey, you were a fireman, I was a cop, right? If you seen cops of Ironman eating at a place, they always said it's either they're getting their shit for free or the food's really good.
Yeah.
You know? So that's it. When you would go to Donovan's, you were getting a good food. I mean, they got rated one of the best burgers in the city, right? You get good food, and they weren't hitting you over the head. And Donovan's was a place where when I went to Ireland, I was on a quest to find the best Irish coffee. And I found out from growing up and having Irish coffee, because my mother and father would have Irish coffee, that the secret was the brown sugar. That's the secret. And when I went to Ireland, I wanted to find the best Irish coffee. And we were there for a week and 10 days. My problem was I found the best Irish coffee the first night, and I couldn't get anything to compare it to.
Yeah.
But that coffee that I found over in Ireland, I still don't know if it was as good as the coffee that I was getting in Donovan's. And again, in Donovan's, when you get a pint of Guinness, you get the perfect pour every time. The food was great.
How about the staff?
The staff was always great. They, whether they were just a neighborhood mother trying to pick up a couple extra dollars or somebody from Ireland, and they were always very attentive. They were always very nice. They were always kind.
It's nice to go to an Irish pub and the staff has an Irish accent.
Yeah.
It just adds to the experience.
Oh, it does.
And that homey feeling.
Like I said, when the day my Uncle Joe died, my grandfather, my grandmother, Uncle John, they all had that Irish brogue. So when I go, that's just like I'm coming home.
How about Irish music? Were you ever into you had Irish family? Anybody did growing up, did that?
No, not really. No, what really was, you got to remember when we were growing up, right? And here's a true story. Like, I grew up in a working class family. My father was a cop, my mother a nurse downstairs with my grandparents and everything. We didn't have, 8 tracks back in the day or cassettes of Irish music. You would have the AM radio. If it wasn't on WNBC or 77 ABC, you didn't listen to it. No, we didn't have, the Irish music. As I got older, I got into it, and I liked the bagpipes, and I liked listening to it to a point. A point.
Yeah.
And
I play the bagpipes.
Yeah, I know.
At this point, I like it to a point.
To a point. And again, my grandparents lived downstairs, and they were German. We really didn't listen to German music either. But also growing up, I had, because of Brian, we're talking about Brian, the Chinese guy, he had friends of his that he went to high school with that were Italian. And then his friends became my friends. And I can remember going over to some of these Italians. I'm like maybe 16, 17 years old, maybe like a junior in high school, and going over to these Italians for, Sunday lunch or something. And they would come out and the pasta and the sauce and some of the gravy. They have wine on the table, and they'd be up there screaming and yelling at each other. But they were family, and they were very close-knit. And when you went in there, I'm going in there. I'm an Irishman, an Irish-German. I'm going in with a Chinese guy, and we're sitting down at a table, and we're breaking bread with them, and we were family. They treated us like family. Even Brian, he treated me like family. I remember for a couple of years in a row, I'd go out with him for Chinese New Year with his family. And the Chinese, color red is big to them. Yeah. They would always give out red envelopes. And probably after like the third year I was there, I was getting an envelope. And there was always money in the envelope. It's $1 or $2. Yeah. But I was there for years. So I actually grew up with Chinese people, Italian people, Irish people, and, I had a very nice upbringing. And it was a different time. Everybody came here for the same reason, for a better life, and you assimilated, and you came and everybody got along. And, when you were growing up, all right, so Brian was Chinese, but he was still a Woodsider, so it was, he was one of us.
Yeah. So. Well, John, thank you so much.
Anytime.
Good stuff.
We could talk more if you want.
Yeah.
Or some more bourbon.
And I want to put some steaks on a grill too.
Oh, you don't have to do that.
So before we dive into a podcast about Donovan's Pub, I have a few more people that we're going to hear from regarding growing up in Woodside and their memories of this local gem of a pub. So stay tuned, and please be sure to subscribe to the show.